The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise this evening to pursue a question that I initially asked on the 10th of October. And I intended this question to the, and it was responded to by the Minister of Environment. It's been catalogued tonight under Aboriginal Affairs. It really touches on a number of key questions. It touches on energy policy, it touches on environmental impacts, and it touches on First Nations rights. And the issue is that of the proposed Site C dam. Now, this dam, when I asked about it on October 10th, the federal government had not yet rendered a decision in response to a joint federal-provincial panel that reviewed the project. This is an extraordinarily large mega project. Just for people who are perhaps not aware of it, British Columbians certainly know about it. It is expected to top $8 billion in costs. It will flood over 5,550 hectares along an 83-kilometer stretch of the valley. It's an extremely controversial project, and the question I asked on October 10th related to the opposition to this project from Treaty 8 First Nations in Alberta, as well as to the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and BC First Nations as well. Now, within a few days of when I asked the question, the federal government did give its commitment to approve the Site C dam. The interesting thing that I think we need to focus on here, and I hope that the opposition, whoever speaks to this from the Conservative benches will respond to this particular concern, which is that I see the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Environment has indicated that he will be responding. That's very good news indeed, my dear friend. But here's the problem. The Joint Environmental Review Panel found, as a matter of fact, that there would be significant environmental damage which was not capable of mitigation if Site C goes ahead. As well, the panel found that there was significant damage to the exercise of traditional and First Nations rights, including rights for fishing, rights for hunting and trapping, and other customary uses of the land, which could not be mitigated. Now, this runs directly contrary to First Nations treaty rights and to the rights that are protected through the Constitution. Furthermore, the nature of Aboriginal rights and title has been consistently upheld in the Supreme Court of Canada. What happened since the government approved the project is that several First Nations have now taken the matter to court, as have residents within the area. So the Treaty 8 First Nations, the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, the Mikisew Cree First Nation, both of which are in Alberta, as well as Treaty 8 signatories in northern British Columbia, have launched lawsuits against this project. Their contention, and I think it's unassailable, but we'll see what the courts will say, is that they were never adequately consulted. Site C is simply not needed. Even BC Hydro admits that it doesn't have a need for the power that would be generated for Site C, not for quite some time. The Joint Federal-Provincial Panel was also clear that the economics of this project are dubious, put the province into debt, and the province had failed to adequately consider, and that BC Hydro had failed to adequately consider, other forms of cleaner generation, which numerous economic studies say will provide more benefit for British Columbia, and particularly for the First Nations involved. It's a matter of respecting First Nations that we say no to Site C.
Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member's question from October 10th deals with a matter that is now before the courts, so it would be inappropriate for me to touch on certain details. I can, however, use my allotted time to speak about the review process for the Site C Clean Energy Project and the potential benefits if the project proceeds. Mr. Speaker, Site C underwent a rigorous review by an independent panel that was jointly established with British Columbia. The environmental assessment met the requirements of both the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012 and the BC Environmental Assessment Act. As Canadians expect, we avoided duplication and delivered on our goal of one project, one review. Public hearings were held in the Fort St. John region of British Columbia. The process included extensive, meaningful, and respectful consultations with First Nations. The process drew upon federal and provincial scientific and technical experts. The process provided an opportunity for experts outside government to weigh in and provide a variety of information, both for and against the project. The panel explicitly recognized the effective engagement of the public and Aboriginal groups. The result was a thorough and comprehensive report that has informed the positive environmental assessment decisions of both governments. Mr. Speaker, the federal government is committed to making environmental assessment decisions based on the best available scientific evidence and to balancing economic and environmental considerations. This is what we have done for Site C. Construction of Site C would translate into about 10,000 direct person years of employment until 2024, and when indirect and induced jobs are added in, that figure, Mr. Speaker, climbs to 29,000 person years of employment. This project would benefit future generations. Site C would support jobs and economic growth through clean, renewable, and dependable energy over the next 100 years. Over the life of the project, Site C would help mitigate the growth of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada by preventing the discharge of between 34 and 76 megatons of CO2 equivalent. It is now up to the Government of BC to make an investment decision. If the project does proceed, British Columbia Hydro will be obligated to fulfill specific conditions, including the implementation of mitigation measures identified by the Minister of the Environment. A failure to do so would be a violation of the federal law. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I want to remind the House that the legally binding nature of these federal conditions is a result of legislative changes passed by this House in 2012. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend, the Parliamentary Secretary. The Joint Environmental Review, federal, provincial, and Site C, was quite scathing in its findings of the lack of economics on the BC Hydro's projections. It also was very clear that there was going to be massive environmental damage, loss of farmland, and the report was anything but unequivocal. It clearly stated that there would be losses that were not capable of mitigation. As to the claims that Site C is anything like renewable or green, large-scale hydro facilities of this type are specifically not included globally in terms that would be applicable to renewable energy. The state of California, for instance, in its renewable definition, wouldn't include a project of this size. This is a damaging, non-renewable, non-green project. On the other hand, a number of studies, such as by KPMG, by a number of other economic think tanks, have looked at the alternatives in green tech and other renewable energy that could have been put forward instead. Clean Energy BC, as the Association of BC Independent Power Producers, has made a compelling case that we don't need Site C.
Parliament Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government is protecting the environment while supporting economic growth. This project will provide thousands of direct and indirect jobs and provide clean, renewable energy for the next 100 years. Of all the possible ways to generate energy, this project would have the lowest level of greenhouse gas emissions. The project underwent a thorough, independent review and extensive consultations with the public and Aboriginal groups. Mr. Speaker, I'm amazed to see the member oppose this project. Maybe it's because they'd rather see a job-killing carbon tax. I'm not sure.